All right. Welcome to Littorally Alive. Sponsored by Littoral Books, Maine's independent publisher of poetry, fiction, and nonfiction, whose titles include Robert Gibbon's Old Orchard Beach Cycle, Monkey by Agnes Buchel, and the latest book of essays by author Suzanne Farrell Smith titled Small Off Things. Those titles and more are available on littoralbooks.com, and I put the link in the chat. If you're just joining us, more people are joining us by the minute. We are recording. We record every session, and you can see the recordings online at literalbooks.com/littorally alive. And those usually go up within a week of the recording. We ask that you leave your audio on mute throughout the session until we have a Q&A towards the end. And we encourage you to use the reaction buttons and to type in any comments or questions using the chat feature. There will also be a Q&A, as I just said, at the end of the interview with Gillian. Well, my name is Robert Diamante, and I will be hosting tonight's show, a discussion with Gillian Burnes, author of the novel Soft Features. And if you haven't purchased it, it's a wonderful novel, and it is available on littoralbooks.com. Gillian is the daughter of a meteorologist and a librarian. She studied English at East Carolina University and the University of Delaware, and journalism at UNC Chapel Hill. Her resume includes giving eye drops to owls. You're going to have to talk about that one, Gillian. Canvassing for Greenpeace, night clerking in an ER, ghostwriting memoirs, and waiting tables for Freemasons. Since 1998, she's been a magazine copy editor with periods as a legislative proofreader and teaching middle school language arts. Her stories have appeared in Glimmer Train, the Dilly Dune Review, and her nonfiction has appeared in Outside Magazine, On Earth, and Wilderness, to name a few. Soft Features is her first novel. Welcome, Gillian.
Thank you, Robert.
You're welcome. This is
Thank you.
exciting.
Thank you, Luke.
So let's dive right into Soft Features. And the main character is Coralie Jane Threlfell. And she is a producer for a fictitious Maine public radio company. And she's married to a farmer, would-be writer, her husband Lonnie, and she has two girls. Why don't you tell us a little more about Coralie and what's going on with her in Soft Features?
Well, Coralie is professionally at the top of her game. She's a veteran, she's a prize winner, and for reasons she doesn't get a handle on for quite a while, she's lost her shell. She's become overwhelmed with empathy for her subjects. And the overwhelm is manifesting in lots of terrible ways. She's trying to hold herself together because everybody depends on her at the office and at home. She has to keep her job. I don't know if a lot of the listeners here are familiar with small Maine agriculture, but you usually need one member of the couple to have a regular day job to keep a farm afloat. And she has friends who depend on her, and her boss depends on her. So she's hiding her problem and muddling through.
So she breaks down in different ways throughout the book. She's having very strong emotional reactions to the stories that she's producing and reporting on, and they range from like tears to hysterical laughter, and the way you describe those are, I think, a lot of fun. You have a really great sense of humor, without being, I guess, unsensitive to the character. It's just she is a funny person. She has a sense of humor. Would you read? She did an interview with a doctor who does animal rescue, an animal rescue doctor. And afterwards, she's with her intern, Helen, and they go back to the station. And there's a really great scene in the bathroom there. Would you just read that short scene for the audience?
Absolutely. Oh yeah, just a little bit. All right. This rinsed out, jangly post-weeping sensation has become one of my default states. The bathroom mirror shows a Rorschach of blotches and pink conjunctiva. And I wonder if women who wear makeup to work are better able not to cry at the office. You can't get all lachrymose if you need to preserve your eyeliner. Maybe breaking out my old tube of Great Lash would make a difference. I crank out half a yard of brown paper towel and scour myself back to normal, or closer to it. Danny opens the door just as I'm practicing a smile in the mirror. "Oh my God," she says, "are you crying? What happened?"
So Danny is one of your coworkers. What is this? Describe the station.
It's a pretty important news outlet, I think, in this world, kind of like our beloved MPBN. There's a newsroom, and it's a very tight little group, 5 or 6 people, and then the administration is upstairs. Studios are downstairs, and so it's a lot like the radio station where I was an intern, also in the mid-90s. This was in North Carolina, but I drew on that a lot.
Is that what set you up to write soft features?
It is. It's wish fulfillment. Helen, the intern, does not have a voice for radio naturally, and I didn't either. I still don't.
Describe that. I mean, if somebody hasn't read it, they don't know what Helen goes through. So would you describe that? And apparently it's what you went through. Is it sort of?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I fell in love with the medium. I fell in love with the workplace. I was on my second master's program trying to find my niche. And I thought, finally, this is it. This is total love. And I was on air for about 2 months and couldn't stand the sound of my voice. If a recorded piece came on the radio, I would switch it off and cringe. And after a while, I was pulled off the radio and continued my internship. So I kept researching and reporting and recording and producing, but somebody else would voice the stories.
Well, wait a minute. They pulled you off?
They were right to, though. It was
Well, I mean, obviously they're going to make the best decision for the company. So that happens to Helen in the book.
That happens to Helen, but I get to have this career, fictionally through Coralie. So this novel was absolute wish fulfillment for me.
And do you work on a farm?
I live on the edge of my in-laws' organic beef farm. So I've learned a little bit, have friends who are dairy farmers.
So you're drawing from your own experiences. You are basing it at a time period it's interesting. It's 1994, 95. Why did you do that time period?
Well, the quick and dirty answer to that is so I wouldn't have to learn a whole lot of new radio tech. I could just keep the digital audio recorders and the Akai and all the mixing board and everything the way I remembered it. But really, I think there turned out to be other advantages. For one thing, it was a little bit of a golden age for public radio. This is right before This American Life went national, and that's a part of the book also.
You mentioned that in the book. Yeah, let's pause there for a moment because she's working on a show called Vox Humana. Why don't you tell us?
She and her best friend Danny are working on a show called Vox Humana, and it's kind of co-evolving with This American Life. They don't know it exists yet, although they will. And you
mentioned it's like a little fledgling Chicago program that people are going to talk about one day.
Yeah, Helen has bootleg cassettes, and it's one of the things that raises the stakes for Coralie. She must continue doing this program, this pilot idea, with her friend Danny, or else her friend Danny is going to be heartbroken. And so they're working on it slowly over the course of the book.
So how does soft features relate to Coralie? What is a soft feature?
It's a puff piece. I guess they're sometimes called human interest stories. It's light stories of people doing lovely things, and that's one of Coralie's coping mechanisms is to try to get herself as many soft features as she can to fill up her work week. So she's not dealing with domestic abuse and AIDS and terrible plane crashes. What'd you say?
Tragedy. This reminds me of the section of the book where you're going to have to explain who Art is to the listeners, but there's a section of the book where she's in a store and her two girls are with her, Susanna, and Bryony. And they're young. You might want to tell us their ages, and she's in the store with the girls, and she's in the checkout line. Why don't you read that whole scene, because that scene is really good. And she's reflecting on the nature of tragedy as spoken through the words of Art. Who's Art?
Art is her news director.
Okay.
So he's sort of like the editor-in-chief of the newsroom.
Okay.
And he's an ornery cuss in a good way, a real defender of the language. Every once in a while in story meetings, he'll say, all right, everybody, it's time for a language rant. And
he has a really great language rant at one point, which I don't know if there's going to be time to read it, but that was one of my favorites in the book. But read this scene because it's a really great scene on tragedy. Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so they're at the supermarket, and so it's just Coralie and her little girls. Bryony's first or second grade. Susanna's younger. Bryony's very sensitive. Susanna is tough and indomitable.
Oh no, I think. Oh, did we? Uh-oh, I think we might have lost Gillian. Well, I think maybe I will read until she comes back on. Technology doesn't always work the way we want it to. Can someone just assure me that I am not frozen? Maybe type into the chat that they can hear me. Oh, here, she's back. Gillian, you're back. Okay, so, all right, so I think she was gonna read on page 127. Let me see if we can get her back.
I'm so sorry that happened.
Are you back? Okay, great. I was going to read for you, but I'm so glad you're back.
Okay, I hope that's the last time that happens.
Yeah.
All right, it's a quiet morning.
Oh no. Oh, well, this is not good.
All right, hi. It's a quiet morning at Westcott's, and Bryony and Susanna can ride the sides of the shopping cart like saddlebags without blocking the aisles. They hop on and off to load the wagon, mostly per instructions. I veto the Pop-Tarts and the Fruity Pebbles, but okay the Oreos, though only single stuff. Westcott's is such an old supermarket, the produce section hides in the back where it's easier for the deliveryman. I'm glad when we get there and I can say yes to everything. Bryony picks out peaches from Colombia and Susanna a perforated bag of Gothic black Chilean grapes. In the checkout line, while Susanna tenderly strokes one of every kind of candy bar on display, Bryony points to a tabloid and asks, "Why is that car stuck in the lake?" Silly grown-up stories, nothing for you to worry about. But what is it? It's the red Mazda sedan in which Susan Smith drowned her sons. It's a story about a very strong tow truck. Hey, look, I almost forgot this. A highlights magazine from yesterday's mail, secreted in my giant mom purse for backseat restlessness. Ooh, baby dolphins. Where? Let me see. I try to keep my eyes on the dolphins too, not in a mood for murdered preschoolers or football stars stabbing the mothers of their children. Tragic crash disfigures beauty queen. Tragedy at sea, 44 dead on cruise ship. I knew even before Art's rant on the topic that tragic is a word almost always misused. Tragedy is when a common human foible snowballs out of control and winds up destroying people. It's an arc of cause and effect that an observer can learn from. A fond interest in the sister-in-law turns into an affair, divorce, and suicide. A little rationalization becomes embezzlement, humiliation, and prison. But in real life, said Art, the center block just flies off the back of the truck, right? The skier hits the tree. Those things may be grievous, calamitous, lamentable, or even heartbreaking, not that it's our business to assign an adjective. They're not tragic, but they are tragic. The teenager in the Jeep behind the truck would have lived if someone hadn't pushed an ambitious production schedule or felt confident in his cinder block stacking technique. or if the teen himself had deigned to leave a few more car lengths just in case. The toddler's mom died because she overtrusted her skill on the double black diamond. It's all arcs of flaws and disasters. Everyone's constantly generating causes, and every second of the day and night, someone out there gets hit with an effect.
This for me, like this scene well, I want to hear your take on the scene, and then I'll tell you what it did for me as a reader.
I guess it depends how far down you want to drill into, the nature of causation, karma. Everything. It can be tragic if you look hard enough.
What does it mean for Coralie, though? I mean, what did obviously she's reflecting on this. I found this to be like a pivotal scene in her understanding of where she ends up at the end of the book, but this was sort of a pivotal turn for her in terms of her interior monologue, sort of.
Yeah, not that it helps, because shortly after this, she has another one of her
spells,
yes. And maybe it goes to show that understanding a problem isn't necessarily enough. Something else has to shift.
So she's a news producer, and she's struggling to understand her ability to remain objective, which is like one piece of it while she's reporting. And throughout the book, you take us through a range of the topics that she is producing. And we already mentioned animal rescue. There was this thread of the ptarmigan pond goblin, who was loosely based on the North Pond hermit. And then you've got the mission boat, the Loaves and the Fishes, that services the remote islanders. I want you to read something from the Loaves and the Fishes, if you could, because that's such a great storyline. But how much research did you do into these stories before you put them into the book?
I did a lot of research on little details. I had to figure out, okay, I want 6 people to be able to sleep on this boat. How long does it have to be? Lots of little, just little world building details. I tried not to look too closely at the real North Pond hermit or other hermits who are out there I'd heard of. Didn't want to look too closely at the real mission ship that goes to the islands in Maine.
So there's a real one. There is a real one.
There is a real one, yeah. And I just didn't want to know because I didn't want to lift too much from real life. Then I did go back and double check and make sure I hadn't lifted too much. And I actually changed some things to make them more fictional in those rare instances where I guessed correctly.
So read a scene from The Loaves and the Fishes.
All right, I'll read it. This is an early scene.
And tell us first. Just tell us again. Like, there's Father Burres, right? And there's Patrick. And what do they do? And where are they going? And just sort of set it up that way.
Sure. Father Burres is he used to be an army chaplain. Now he runs this mission ship with a registered nurse named Patrick Frost. The two of them are permanently on this ship, and they go around to all the tiny islands. And it's all kinds of services they do. They teach kids how to swim. They do vaccinations. They do pastoral care. It's Father Burres is also a social worker. And so whatever people need out there, they either give it to them or get it to them. And so at this point, this is early at the big. Coralie winds up spending a lot of time on the Loaves and Fishes, multiple trips out there, and things get hairy. This is the beginning. This is her very first trip with them. So they're at the home of a nice old blind lady named Glenna Merritt. An odorous heap of marine hardware is rotting beside the landward end of Glenna's frail wharf. Old hemp warp and nylon sheeting and crumbling chunks of styrofoam buoy. I collect sound of the engine slowing, the squeak of the bumpers, footfalls, and debarkation chatter. Glenna Merritt, tiny and permed, stands framed in an oversized picture window that has ruined the architectural integrity of the shingled cottage, but is probably really nice to have, or would have been when she could see. You have someone with you, Mrs. Merritt tries to drink me in through her blue-tinted spectacles. Her eyelids are stippled with skin tags. Are you a nurse, dear? We need more nurses around here, don't we, Dr. Patrick? I introduce myself and ask if it's all right to record her, possibly for a piece on WNPR public radio. The radio, gasps Mrs. Merritt. Oh my goodness, do you know Rush? The radio, the radio. She shakes her head at her great luck. Come in, come in. My blood sugar's up and down like a yo-yo, dear. You'll see. Let me get you some refreshments. We follow her in through a narrow mudroom with a red-tipped white cane hanging from a hook beside a yellow slicker, then into a dusty but uncluttered living room of whitewashed wainscoting and abstract oil paintings in 1950s shades of mustard and burgundy. These are beautiful, I say. Are you a painter? My brother was. Do you like them? I'll put one in my will for you. My girls think they're boring. Who's here, Billy? I'm here, Glenna. Billy's the crewman on the boat. All I have is Sanka, and I'm out of half and half. My daughter was supposed to go shopping for me. She took my checks in, but I don't know what happened. Sit down. Are you sitting down? Glenna, I'd like to get started now, says Patrick. Would you prefer that Miss Threlfell turn off her recorder? No, she's fine. They can't see me on the radio, can they? There follows a few minutes of medical activity, a lancet to the fingertip to check her blood glucose, a look in her eyes to check her diabetic retinopathy, pinprick tests of sensitivity in her feet and fingers, a few stern words about the cookies. I ask Patrick to narrate every move as he makes it, and he does. Then a check of her cupboards to make sure she has food, a check of the generator to make sure she has diesel, all on tape. Father Burres walks her out to the loaves and fishes and into its library nook, where she takes a seat on a vinyl bench and says, yes, please, or no, thank you, as the priest holds up and names one large print book after another. She favors bodice rippers and Christian apocalyptic fantasy. Father Burres gives me a hand signal and I hit pause, this time so he can settle beside her, hold her hand and pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for all you provide, and I ask you to continue to watch over your child, Glenna, to give her health and safety, comfort and warmth. Anything else? Susie? Of course. And please look after her daughter-in-law, Susie, as she heals her broken heart, and let her find strength until you see fit to send a new pregnancy. Amen, whispers Glenna. We all walk back to her house, even Les and Billy, with a paper cup of half and half to tide her over. Everyone spends a long time saying goodbye, and Mrs. Merritt won't let me out the door without a stack of cookies wrapped in a paper towel. When you see Dr. Laura, you be sure and tell her I think she's just wonderful. I'll give her the message the moment I see her. Billy gives me a few facts about Great Cormorant Island. He says it has about 6 year-round households plus a few vacation homes, and Mrs. Merritt's children and children-in-law are in and out from the mainland often. But from the loaves and fishes, as it pulls away, her place looks even more tiny and forlorn. Where's Father Burres, I ask. I'm going to skip down a little bit. He likes to be by himself between stops. He prays. Oh. Somehow I unconsciously assumed the religion was theater for the parishioners' sake. Obviously, I've been projecting my own tastes. Growing up without religion, I missed the crucial learning window one has to hit in order to find it's all part of God's plan, anything but offensive on every level. I bet Father Burres cuts through the layers of myth and metaphor into the heart of things, the forgiveness and selflessness that any good-hearted person would feel anyway. Maybe a meditative pause just helps cleanse the palate.
She goes, thank you. She goes after Father Burres to talk with him about her crisis. Mm-hmm. She's not a religious person, but how does that go for her?
It takes a while.
Oh. Another slight pause.
Hi.
There you go. Gave us all time to think about your reading.
Yeah, she's kind of stalking him. She wants to pour her heart out, but it also feels like a journalistic violation. You know, he's a subject. She's a reporter. She's not supposed to be leaning on him or being guided by him. So she has a long kind of dance with him over the course of the book.
She's dancing with those journalistic ethics throughout the book. I mean, she's lost her objectivity. But we learn towards the end that it might not have anything to do with the stories themselves. I mean, obviously it's all inside of her, it's all internal, but not before she has like one of the greatest breakdowns, I think, in the book. And would you feel uncomfortable giving that scene away?
Is it the one of the Hall of Flags?
Yeah, so she's reporting on a story, and I even thought like the choice of the story was like, wow, this is really interesting. Tell us what the story is and why she's at the State House, right? At the Hall of Flags, at the State House.
Yeah, it's a big press conference, very volatile. There have been deaths. Babies have died from complications of circumcisions.
Botched circumcisions, right?
Yeah. So different interest groups are angry in all different directions. It's a real powder keg. And Art sends her to go and do this. He forgot. He just had a baby. He's forgetting things. So he remembers at the last minute, oh, you've got to go to this feeding frenzy. It's going to be intense. Just go get tape. And so
and it's one of the parents is testifying right before the legislature.
It's more of a press conference, but okay. She's there. Yeah.
Okay. So and they run into like a couple that lost their child. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So somehow I didn't anticipate the obvious, that at least one set of bereaved parents would be there. The mother wears a navy blue suit, heavy blonde bangs, and no makeup. The father, glassy-eyed and gold-spectacled in a dull argyle sweater vest, keeps one hand on her at all times, moving it from her lower back to her upper arm to her upper back, seeking comfort from her solid body rather than conferring it. They don't look Turkish. Could they be the Diamonds, transformed into protesters so soon? Or are they yet another set of parents who rocked themselves through a night in hard plastic hospital chairs, begging God to take them instead? It's too easy to imagine these two turning the key in their front door lock, switching on the lights, and choosing whom to call to help spread the unspeakable news. They had to locate the F's in the yellow pages for a funeral home. Can you hire someone to pack up your crib and onesies and take them to Goodwill? Did they sell their house and move away from their son's empty room? How can they walk the streets and see healthy growing babies without falling into an endless Klein bottle shaft of guilt and grief? How can they walk at all with the ground yanked out and an uncrossable distance yawning between themselves and everyone on earth? Even here in the Hall of Flags, all of the voices are far away and the ceiling much too high. The mother withdraws a rubber-banded stack of index cards from her jacket pocket and flutters it against the heel of one hand. She scans the crowd nervously, and her eyes fall on me. There isn't any particular message in the look. It's just eye contact, but it stabs right through to my core and tickles something. Our connection twangs a deep chord of hilariousness, and I am laughing. I can't stop. Even as a cadaverous, growly-voiced spokesman from the Anti-Circumcision Research League brings order to the room with thanks for everyone's attendance, I am racked with giggles. Soon tears drip down my chin. An unholy hoot snort rips through the Hall of Flags and turns every face my way. One breath, too, then a total gelastic rupture, which rings out in the great chamber and its marble corridors. I am buckled over, guffawing for a long time, it feels like, and eventually I reassemble myself enough to lurch through the crowd and actually run like a little kid, down a side staircase, around the perimeter of the suit-packed lobby, and out into the street to Capitol Park. For several seconds after I find a bench, fine silver streamers shoot through my visual field, converging on a distant point. I'm not laughing anymore. Something is seriously wrong with me, bioaccumulated in my tissues like mercury in tuna. It's not mine any more than the heavy metal belongs to the fish, but I suppose neither does it belong to all the creatures I've consumed. Quivery, sniffling, and raw in the throat, I want to go hide in a cave forever.
That was a very cringy scene when I read it. And I thought, oh my gosh, she must be so horrified. And she was. Not long after, we're getting towards the end of the book, and I don't really want to take us through to the end of the book, but she, is there hope for Coralie at this point? Is there hope for her?
There is hope for her. There is hope for her. She's got people who care about her, who do things for her. She's got more adventures ahead.
She's got a really great relationship with Lonnie, her husband, and her girls. It doesn't ever seem to bleed into that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I wanted to write about a happy marriage. I thought it would be a challenge because, all happy families are the same, but they're not really. I think happy families can be just as interesting as miserable, struggling families. And Lonnie and Coralie are so complementary to each other. She's out in the world. He describes himself not as agoraphobic, but claustrophilic. He likes to be alone. And
he writes. He writes. He's a writer too. Tell us what he writes.
He writes young adult science fiction. And he actually uses a lot of story ideas that I've had on my story idea list for years and years and couldn't figure out quite what to do with. So I gave them all to him, and he had fun with them. But they're scary, depressing stories. And one of Coralie's symptoms is that she can't read her own husband's drafts the way a good spouse would. And so that there are some subtle hiccups in the marriage over the course of this. Just keeping something from him is a strain on Coralie, and that comes up in the beginning of chapter 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
and he gets the wrong ideas.
He gets the wrong idea, but we'll let the readers sort of discover that. Yeah, we have to leave some mystery. So, but that sort of brings us to another turn in the conversation. Do you have your husband read your manuscripts? Is he a reader?
He is a reader and a hero.
Wonderful.
He read this, I think, 3 times. And I also mine him for information. He knows about boats. I don't know about boats. So I'll come to him with a 2-page long list of questions about boats. Where would you have to stand to not be in the wind if you're going this fast? Things like that.
So he is, it sort of brings up the question of like process. So this is your first novel, right? And did this start as a short story? Was it always going to be a novel? Like what was the kernel of Soft Features, and and we could talk about like our process of writing and everything a little bit afterwards, but how did this start?
Mm-hmm. This started from a short story that ran in Glimmer Train in 2013 or 2014. And it was called Transit, and it was a series of epiphanies with the premise that, an astrological premise. What would happen if, in fact, we got to see Uranus do this to everybody at a certain time zone? And one of the characters was Billy. It was Billy Ahern, who's the lobsterman in this.
Yeah. Wow.
And so he started out as a much bigger character in this book and wound up getting squeezed a little bit. And it went through so many iterations. For a while, I had different chapters from different characters' points of view. Danny had chapters, Art had chapters, Billy had chapters. I wanted one arc that would carry over the whole radio station. But nothing was really coming together. And then by the end, I realized that Coralie had enough to say. Coralie, her problem mattered the most to me at the time. And then everything kind of slotted into place.
So how long did you work on it? How long, did you work on it from 13 to 22 when it was published, or?
I worked on it it took several years, and I put it down a few times, and I did a lot of procrastinating. It was very easy to run away from.
What does your procrastination look like? Do you write short stories in the meantime, or poetry on the back of cocktail napkins? I mean, what is your procrastination as a writer?
Some of my procrastination is short stories. I like to write, almost all of my short stories start out as presents, Christmas and Hanukkah and birthday presents, as if that gives me permission to make something.
Now, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. Do you give them to people, or really?
Yeah, mostly my husband. I've given them to my daughter too.
What are they about? Are they about anything, or are they about about that person, or your feelings? Or can you give us an example, or is that too personal?
No, that's fine. I gave my daughter's really interested in mycology, and she grows mushrooms in the backyard and in the basement, and so I wrote her a short story about what would happen if it's going to sound kind of creepy, if the fungi growing in an old cemetery sporulated and the people passing by the cemetery inhaled the dreams and hopes of the people who were buried under those mushrooms. Oh, so as they're walking by, they have this kind of shimmer of, a crush on somebody, or a craving for a food. And so I gave that to her for her birthday one year.
Well, what's so lovely about that is that it's given as a gift, but you didn't turn it into a horror. It could easily have gone like the way of The Last of Us or something like that.
That's right. Yeah, this was probably The Last of Us. Oh, yeah.
But you didn't. I mean, it's like you turned it into something, because I don't know how you feel about literature these days and stuff that's going on out there these days. There's a lot of apocalyptic stuff, and it's getting very old and boring. And that's why it was so nice to read your book, because it was actually about somebody who's really going through something that we can empathize with. And it's not only is she funny, but she's very real. She's very honest with the reader, and she's very honest with herself when she finally does get to that moment where she has her final epiphany. We're not going to talk about, though, what that is, because that's the wonderful mystery. So you write short stories as gifts, and is that your preferred methodology? I mean, your preferred?
I think so. There's something about that, the permission it gives you. You're allowed to make potholders and paint pottery for, there aren't that many times when an adult can feel okay making things. And so the short stories, are often sparked by a conversation I have with the recipient. And then eventually, sometimes I'll send them off and try to get them published.
Well, you've had very good luck. So do you think you have another novel that you're working towards, or a series of short stories, maybe a book of short stories?
I have a stack of short stories. They're too long for most magazines and websites. Most of them have a 3,000 or 4,000 word limit, and mine are 7 to 12. It's a kind of the novella problem. It's an odd length.
Yeah, it can be a strange length. Do you take time? Like I love asking artists questions about their process. As an artist, everyone has a different process. Like I'm always in awe of people that are up until 4 o'clock in the morning and they work in the wee hours. And because I'm a person that's in bed by 9 and up at dawn. So what is your project? Like, where do you find time to write? You're a mom, you live on you work, you edit. When do you find time to write? Oh, no. I guess we're not going to find out. We'll find out in a second. I'm sure Gillian will be back. In the meantime, we're kind of running close to 45 minutes, and we've got about 10 to 15 minutes left. I am sure Gillian will be back. I just want to remind everybody, this is Literally Alive, and we always take time at the end of our talks and our readings to field questions from the audience. So right now might be a really good time to start typing in your questions into the chat so that when Gillian shows back up, we can ask her some questions from the audience. And since I'm here, you're more than welcome to ask me a question. All right, she's coming back. I don't see any questions coming in. If you can figure out how to open up your chat, please feel free to answer question or ask questions.
Hi.
Are you there, Gillian?
I am back. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. We have a question from the audience. So,
oh, great.
Do you ever dream of or through the character? Gillian, do you ever dream of or through the character?
Ooh, I think I have dreamt. I think characters in the book have been in my dreams.
How did you inhabit Coralie along those lines? Like, did you talk to her while you were driving in your car? Did she talk through you? Did you dream about her?
I think I'm a method writer, the way some actors are method actors. I had to feel everything she was feeling and then describe it as I was going through it. Maybe other writers don't have to do that, but it could be kind of grueling. So I would put myself in positions, imaginatively, that were a little like things I've been through, but then turn up the dial. I don't know. Does that answer your question? When you're writing fiction, do you have to feel the feelings that the character?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, at this point, I don't think I've ever written a character that I can't in some way empathize with. I've definitely been experimenting more with kind of horrific people, like writing about somebody who's maybe a little bit more sociopathic, and that's when you draw on past experiences with people and maybe try to imagine what it might like to be in somebody else's shoes. So yeah, from that perspective, sometimes the lens is a little further and sometimes it's right on the inside, if that makes sense. Yeah. So, okay, so along the lines of process, are you a morning writer or an afternoon writer? Or?
I'm an afternoon writer. I would love to be one of those get up and go, 5 o'clock. I'm a late sleeper and a night owl. So I really get revved up around 10 a.m., which doesn't impress anybody.
It takes a little coffee. So does anybody else have any questions for Gillian or for me for the evening? Anything else you'd like us to know about soft features? I have to say I enjoyed the novel very much, and I could have you read more. One of my favorite scenes was, and I don't know if you could pull it out really quick, but there was a burial at sea. Is that something that you?
Oh yeah, I can do that. Let's see.
That was a lot of fun, and that took place with the loaves and the fishes story. And to set it up, she's with Father Burnes, and they go to an island, and the woman is sort of notoriously unfriendly. Maybe.
Yeah, she's a scary lady. Let me see if I can find this. 69. I have the manuscript on my computer, so I can just Control F.
Oh, I kind of set you up for that. I'm sorry. So
that's okay. Oh, what page? Do you know do you have a page number?
I don't think I do. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's all right. So, all right.
I found
so she's with the loaves and fishes. This is later on that same trip. Let's see. Got it. Treatments.
Is it?
The next stop is about half an hour away. Father Burnes warns me that the woman we're visiting, Pam Hughes, is unlikely to open up much on tape. Her mother was killed in a car crash on the mainland last year, and he's checking in on her. That's all he feels comfortable saying. Robert, is this the part you were thinking of?
Yeah, it is.
About an hour and a half later, we're in the Zodiac again, fighting a chop toward the sheer cliff face that is Eliphon's most hospitable side. Perilous stairs switch back down the bluff to a dock where Mrs. Hughes, holding a red plastic milk crate, awaits. Don't get out, she calls. I'm getting in. Undyed hair and a tight old-fashioned bun ages her. Or maybe her long legs and mannishly broad shoulders make her seem younger than she is. As Patrick ties up, I'm shocked to see the crate contains a plain black funerary urn. Are you sure? Asks Father Burnes. Billy looks alarmed. It's been more than 9 months. Mom didn't like things cluttering up the house. And anyways, 9 months is whatever. Appropriate, right? That's what I owe. She notices me. Who's this? I'm introduced as she passes the crate to Patrick and takes a seat in the rubber dinghy. Suddenly, I want to kick off my shoes and swim like hell away from here, but she's more than happy for me to tape the grim proceedings in their entirety. My family don't give a flying fuck what I do. If they hear Mom's funeral on the radio, I got nothing to be ashamed of. Let's go. What do you have in mind? Asks Father Burnes as we bank around. Take us out to the Rip. You can say something nice. You know the Valley of the Shadow of Death? By heart. Good, that one. I'll let her go out there. That sounds very nice. Are you certain your sons don't want to be here? They're working, they said, both of them. I see. And your sister? She only talks to me to call me a murderer. She turns to me, or on me. You believe that? She didn't even come to the hospital, but she thinks she knows. She's got no idea. Can you believe that? She relates that her mother had been driving back from a shopping trip on greasy snow near Eastleigh and collided with a snowplow. If she were ever to regain consciousness, which was unlikely, she'd have been in diapers, oblivious to her own family, sustained by a feeding tube. The decision to withdraw life support was the obvious one to make, Pam Hughes says, but her sister regrets it. At the appointed place, distinguishable by nothing as far as I can see, Billy cuts the motor and Pam clears her throat of smoker's phlegm. The ashes turn out to be inside a Ziploc within the matte black plastic urn. And it's the bag, the banality of it, I guess, that breaks Pam's composure. Her mouth purses into a bloodless white shrivel and her shoulders quiver, while Father Burnes recites, He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. I watch my VU needle rather than the mist of ash, which falls with the bright shimmering sound on the surface of the ocean. On the ride back to her dock, I keep recording. This one day a nurse comes into Mom's room, Pam tells me, but she wasn't one of our nurses. And she says, does your mother have a TBI? And I said, yeah. And she says, I can tell by the smell. She said, brain trauma people have a certain smell, and you get to know it when you work on them long enough. You ever smell it? I never forget that. It was so strange. That's how I knew I was right. With that, a great weight seems to rise off her shoulders. Her posture uncramps and uncurls. She turns her closed eyes to the sun and sighs a sigh of peace so obviously deep it speaks of durability. Pam Hughes's unextravagant smile, a gesture not of the mouth, but of the whole easeful face, makes me wish for the first time I worked in television rather than radio. And it gives me hope that I won't be hearing the sound of ashes in my half-sleep tonight. I can't wait to write and air this feature. The headwind blows my single tear of relief straight back toward my ear.
Thank you. That's very powerful scene. We have a question from Marianne Ferguson. I have to take a minute. What has been the response of Maine NPR? Have you had any response? Did you know anyone there? Like, did you know people? Do you know people there?
I know people who used to work there a long time ago. I got a mention on Maine, All Books Considered, Maine Calling. That was really cool.
Right on. Can you speak to, this is from Allison Gardner, can you speak to the interesting portrait of how a radio show is put together or was put together in the era? So I think we're talking about 1994, 95?
Yeah. it was the beginning of digital. So it was when I started, the radio station had just unscrewed this little device that it bolted onto the desk, and you could put a piece of tape in it and slice it with a razor blade, and then tape the two ends together with splicing tape. And that was how they would edit the sound. And so you'd have producers would walk around with bleeding fingers all the time. They're constantly slicing themselves. And you'd have these little tags of tape. And my mentor at WUNC told me how they used to have little tabs of tapes with all of the gasps, and so then I said, and you take those out because it's just awful on the ear. So you take out little, sniffs and snorts and coughs and gasps. And so they were saved there. And the reporters would put them together into one long, horrible sound punishment and play it for fun for themselves.
That's hilarious.
But when I arrived, it was the beginning of digital. So we had digital tape, little tiny cassettes, which we would dump into this cool machine that had 4 tracks, and you could cut and paste and move pieces of sound for the first time. It wasn't on a computer screen, so you couldn't see anything. You had to just kind of remember in your head when things were happening. But it was so much easier than what came before. And I think that had something to do with This American Life coming when it did, because it's so sound rich.
It really is. I mean, with the way they do music, and it's very slick, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So that was like one of the first slick, interesting. Did you, somebody's coming in. Did you, did you know that you just didn't want to go into radio at a certain point? Like you were like, okay, this is not for me. Do you mind if I ask that question?
That's fine. No, I was always sad. I wound up having a great job. I landed on my feet after a little while. But it's the path not taken. I don't know whether I could have gotten my voice into usable shape. This was just 1995 was just before, I guess I was there in 97. It was just before Starlee Kine and Sarah Vowell and women with high squeaky voices like mine were on the radio and were okay. And so it was a little bit of bad timing, but it all worked out.
So sort of to bring it full circle, this novel was wishful thinking, which you sort of mentioned at the very beginning of this. You were sort of living some of your wishful thinking through Coralie. What?
Some of it, yeah. And then, but she also got burdened with, problems I've been through in my life. I had a long spell of lacking a shell after my mother died. Mm-hmm. So I remembered that well. And so she took that on. And she worked it out differently than I did. And I think she had a more interesting resolution than I did. I just got better with, friends and family and therapy.
I find with writing, you can tackle your own problems without them being your own problems. You can shovel them off onto somebody else and work through them maybe a little bit more objectively. I don't know how objective you can actually be, but it's like, it's like projecting onto this other creature that you've created and maybe work through some of those issues.
Yeah, and then they get to work for you instead of just ruining your life. Let them get a job.
So what's next? Anything you're excited about? Any characters that you constantly take with you or have come to life?
Oh, I'm sorry. I dropped out for a minute. What was your question?
What are you working on? Like, do you have a character that you're in love with right now, or that you're excited by, or that you absolutely hate but you can't get rid of? What's of interest?
I do have a character. I don't think I'm ready to talk about him yet.
Okay,
it's a lot of guys. I'm writing about a lot of men.
All right. Well, we look forward to that. So we've got a few minutes here, and we're towards the end of the show. If there are any more questions, we've got time for maybe a quick question. I do want to remind people that this is going to be recorded, and if you'd like to share it, It will be on Littoral Books, Littorally ALIVE page within a week. And you can rewatch it if you'd like, or you could share it with friends. It'll be posted to YouTube. And also we will be doing another Littorally ALIVE in April, and we'll be speaking with, I'm sorry, I have to pull it up. We will be talking with Susan Farrell Smith and her book, which has just been published by Littoral Books, Small Off Things. She will actually be interviewed by a friend of hers. They're going to be in conversation together, and I am just going to be moderating. So I think it's going to be a wonderful conversation. Join us for that, and purchase your Littoral Books at the Littoral Books website. You can get Gillian's soft features. So thank you for joining us tonight, Gillian. Anything else you'd like to say about the book or about anything in general?
Oh, well,
about the universe?
I want to thank Agnes Bushell of Littoral Books for taking a chance on this odd little story, and everybody who read early drafts. There's acknowledgments in the back, but they should really be at the front and interspersed all the way throughout, and taped like a band around the corner, around the whole package. And thanks to my husband and my mother-in-law for babysitting. And thank you, Robert, for having me on this wonderful talk show.
Oh, great. Talk show. Wow.
I think this is the beginning of something. I feel
a little like Mike Douglas.
Yeah.
So any other questions from the audience? We have a couple minutes left. I did have one more question that I forgot to ask. I can sneak in. We've got 2 minutes, unless there's another. Nancy Walters. Were you writing when you were pursuing a radio career, and did your writing blossom after the radio career didn't work out well?
Well, I was in journalism school when I was a radio intern like Helen, so I was just slogging through grad school. Then I went from there to a magazine and started fact checking and worked my way into copy editing, and that's where I wound up. And then, copy editing, and I started writing fiction when I left North Carolina more, although that was my concentration in college, and I had written short stories all along.
Thank you. So, okay, we're gonna end this with my question. You can answer it very quickly because we have like a minute. Who was your favorite person to write about?
Ooh.
Soft features.
Favorite person to write about?
Who was your favorite? Yeah, visit. Who was your favorite person to visit?
Art. I could get my grump on. It was great.
He was a lot of fun, and I loved his diatribe. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. You can look out for Art's character when you pick up a copy of Soft Features from Littoral Books or from your favorite local bookstore in Maine. And feel free to send feedback about the show. And again, share it with your friends when the video is up online. Gillian, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. This was such an honor. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Everybody have a great night. Thank you.